Welcome to True Echo, where real moments meet powerful storytelling. Today's story is a stirring reminder that dignity doesn't wear a label, and those who dismiss others based on appearances may be forced to confront truth in the most unexpected way. Now let's begin. It was just after 9 on the first Tuesday of the month when the glass doors of Bank South in Florence slid open with a soft hiss, and Martha Coleman stepped inside. At 72, she moved with the quiet determination of someone who had spent a lifetime doing things that weren't always easy, but were always necessary. Her maroon cardigan, slightly faded at the seams, hung neatly over her shoulders. A teal scarf, its frayed ends swaying lightly, rested across her chest. She clutched a carefully folded piece of paper in one hand. It was a disbursement order from the Lightbridge Foundation, a charitable fund she had helped create 20 years earlier to serve food-insecure families in their local community. For Martha, this wasn't a personal errand, it was a mission rooted in memory, sweat, and prayer. The bank lobby gleamed like a showroom. Marble tiles, brass trim, and high windows pouring in light. A sign on a wooden easel near the front read: "Today's meeting, Lightbridge Foundation, 10 a.m., IM room. Staff only." But few tellers really knew the faces behind Lightbridge, especially not Emily Harper, a junior teller with a clipboard smile and freshly manicured nails. She was young, ambitious, and still nursing a bruised ego from being reprimanded the week prior over a fraud mishap. When Emily glanced up and saw Martha approaching, her gaze swept over the old woman's cardigan, her orthopedic shoes, and the creased paper in her hand. Her lips barely parted as she murmured, "Here we go again." The words floated, just audible enough to leave a sting. Martha approached the counter without comment. She placed the paper down gently, smoothing it with her fingers. "I'd like to confirm a withdrawal request from the Lightbridge Fund, please," she said politely. Emily picked up the paper like it had dirt on it. Her eyebrows twitched at the name, her eyes flicking back and forth between the disbursement order and her monitor. "This your account?" she asked. "Yes," Martha replied, nodding once. Emily's fingers clacked across the keyboard, louder than necessary. She squinted at the screen, then leaned back in her chair, arms folded. "Your name's not showing under this fund," she said flatly. "We only process these if every field aligns." "Check batch 7 under internal designation," Martha said calmly. Emily gave a small, sharp laugh. "That's not how this works, ma'am." She reached under the counter and pressed a discreet button. Moments later, a man emerged from the office. Tall, pressed suit, expensive cologne, branch manager Brian Harris. The kind of man who measured respect by collar stiffness and the number of syllables in someone's last name. Emily handed him the form and explained the issue. Harris barely glanced at Martha before turning to the screen. After a few clicks, he straightened, expression stiff. "We can't confirm your identity, ma'am," he said, not unkindly, but not kindly either. "The system is the source of truth. If your name's not in it, we can't proceed." Martha's hands tightened on the edge of the counter. Her voice remained composed. "That's the original disbursement order. I helped draft the founding documents of Lightbridge. That paper came from my office." Emily scoffed again, louder this time. "This could be forged for all we know." That word, forged, landed with a cold thud. Martha's throat tightened, but she didn't flinch. "That's my name," she said quietly. "That's my signature. And this is my fund." Harris shook his head. "Leave the document, ma'am. We'll verify it later." Martha's jaw tightened. "I'm not leaving it behind." Harris turned to security. "Escort her out." The air shifted. A guard moved toward her, slow but firm. Martha reached for the paper as Harris lunged to snatch it away, but she was quicker. Her hand slapped down on it first. "Don't you dare," she snapped, her voice cracking through the stillness like thunder. She yanked the paper toward her chest, crumpling it in the process, holding it like a shield. "She's refusing to comply," Harris shouted, taking a theatrical step back. And now she's aggressive. Customers turned. A few exchanged glances. One woman looked up from her phone, startled. A man at the deposit box paused mid-motion. Something didn't feel right. The security guard approached, a silent question in his eyes, but policy was policy. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me," he said calmly. Martha's knees bent as she stooped to retrieve the paper she'd dropped. A creak of old joints echoed in the quiet room. She stood slowly, her dignity intact despite everything. And just as she took her first step toward the door, it opened, this time from the outside. A tall man in a navy blue tailored suit stepped through the glass doors, eyes immediately scanning the lobby with the sharp awareness of someone used to walking into tension and commanding it. He was in his early 60s, gray at the temples, shoulders squared with quiet authority. His name was James Prescott, and the briefcase tucked beneath his arm bore the gold insignia of the Lightbridge Foundation. His presence alone shifted the atmosphere. "Martha," he said, his voice rising just slightly. Martha Coleman turned, and her face, though tired and drawn, broke into something softer. "James," she said. James strode toward her in 3 long steps, scanning her face, her crumpled paper, then flicking his eyes to the security guard still standing too close behind her. "What's going on here?" he asked, calm but thunderous. The question hung like a warning in the stillness. Brian Harris cleared his throat. "There was a misunderstanding. The lady, this customer presented a disbursement request, but her name didn't match our internal database." James turned his full gaze on the manager. "A customer," he repeated. "This is Martha Coleman, the co-founder of the Lightbridge Foundation. The very reason we're here today." Emily Harper paled. Even the security guard took a half step back, now realizing the scale of the mistake. The murmurs returned, this time less speculative and more stunned. Customers looked at one another, registering the words. "Co-founder?" James didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Your system failed to display her name because it's under protected access, tied to our Tier 3 board approvals. Had you called the foundation directly, you would have confirmed that. Instead, you chose to threaten her." Harris fumbled. We were just following protocol. With the recent fraud cases." "Protocol?" James cut in coldly. "Is protocol why your teller dismissed her based on her cardigan and scarf instead of the name on the paper?" Emily's face flushed crimson. She looked down at her keyboard as if it could save her. "I'll be reporting this incident," James continued, his voice now steel. "You may expect a full review of this branch, and I will personally speak to the regional board." Martha gently placed a hand on James' arm. "James," she said, "don't make a scene." He turned to her and shook his head. "You shouldn't have to come here to be humiliated just to feed people. This isn't about a scene. This is about justice." Emily looked like she might cry. Harris stood rigid, exposed, unsure whether to apologize or vanish. "I'll take care of it," James said to Martha. Then he looked at Harris. "You're lucky this wasn't a public media moment. But don't worry, it still might be." He turned back to the security guard and added, "You may return to your post." The guard gave a small nod and stepped away, clearly relieved. James picked up the crumpled slip from Martha's hands and smoothed it on the counter. "Process this," he told Emily. "Right now." Emily didn't argue. Her fingers trembled as she entered the necessary codes, the database search finally producing the match from the Lightbridge Fund's secure ledger. Martha Coleman. Authorized founding member. James turned to the small crowd gathered behind them and addressed them calmly. "For those who don't know," he began, "Martha Coleman started the Lightbridge Foundation out of her church basement. Every dollar we've disbursed to this region over the past 20 years, hundreds of thousands, has her signature on it. She's the reason winter heating programs exist. The reason over 5,000 families didn't go hungry last year. A wave of realization rippled through the crowd. Some nodded. Others whispered. And today, James said, turning slowly to look directly at Harris and Emily, this bank, this institution that claims to partner with us, just tried to throw her out. Not because of fraud. Not because of a system glitch. But because she didn't look the way they expected a founder to look. Martha looked away, heart pounding but steady. James faced her again and whispered, "You didn't have to come alone." "I wanted to see if they'd recognize the name without the title," Martha replied. They didn't. Emily pushed the printed confirmation across the desk with trembling hands. It's ready now," she said softly. James gave her a long look. "Thank you," he said flatly, and then took the receipt and handed it to Martha. "Let's go," he said. "We've got a meeting to run." As they turned to walk toward the conference room, the silence behind them wasn't empty, it was charged. Harris remained still behind the counter, humiliated and uncertain. Emily lowered her eyes. She didn't speak. And for a long moment after they disappeared behind the frosted doors, no one in the lobby said a word. Behind the frosted glass of the IMM conference room, the tone was entirely different from the chaos outside. James placed the folder on the polished oak table and opened his laptop. Martha stood beside him, straight-backed, as staffers began filing in. These were executives, analysts, and partners from both Lightbridge and the bank's charitable funding department. Not one of them knew that only moments earlier, the woman now leading the meeting had nearly been escorted out by security. James didn't open with a speech. He simply said, "We're behind schedule. Let's begin." Martha handed out the printed disbursement packets. Each page represented months of work, carefully audited programs, matched donations, emergency relief, and shelter budgets. These weren't just numbers. They were survival. As the meeting progressed, James kept stealing glances at her. Despite the public embarrassment she'd just endured, Martha's focus never wavered. She discussed new community grant timelines, reviewed feedback from shelters, and even corrected a mislabeled district code that had nearly redirected funding. At one point, a young analyst named Melissa leaned over to James and whispered, "Is that the woman from the lobby?" James didn't look away from Martha. "Yes," he said. "That's the reason Lightbridge exists." Melissa blinked, her cheeks reddening. I didn't know." "You do now." Meanwhile, out in the lobby, Emily Harper still hadn't moved much. Her screen displayed the same transaction window, but her mind was miles away. The words kept echoing in her head, "She co-founded the foundation. That's the woman you dismissed." Everything about her training told her to follow protocol. But nothing in her heart that morning had told her to show grace. She replayed it, the judgment in her eyes, the clipped tone, the way she'd leaned back as if Martha were somehow beneath her. Emily wasn't proud of it, but she also wasn't new to it. The hard truth was, she'd done this before. Not as blatantly, maybe, but in subtle ways. She saw it now. 1,000 micro-decisions shaped by bias. Behind her, customers were talking in hushed tones. Some were sympathetic, others judgmental. A few were angry. One woman murmured, "If they'll treat someone like her that way, what chance do the rest of us have?" Even the security guard had changed his posture. No longer stiff and neutral, he now stood with a slight lean toward the conference room, as if waiting for something, perhaps direction, or redemption. Brian Harris, on the other hand, was crumbling inside. He'd built his career on composure. He prided himself on efficiency, on his ability to lead under pressure. But this wasn't pressure. This was exposure. James Prescott had spoken with authority, not threat, but Harris knew what was coming. A report to the regional board meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant documentation. And if anyone pulled footage of the confrontation, they'd see the moment he accused Martha Coleman, pillar of the community, co-founder of the most respected charitable organization in the state, of being a threat to security. The silence in his office was deafening. He finally pulled out his phone and typed a message to the regional compliance officer. Urgent, light bridge incident. Need to discuss ASAP. He didn't send it. Not yet. He stared at the words. What would he say? That an elderly black woman walked in, gave him a piece of paper, and he reacted like it was counterfeit because she didn't match the profile? That his teller called security before anyone picked up a phone? He backed out of the message and put the phone down. Back in the conference room, the final documents were signed. Martha stood, folded her notes, and nodded once to the room. Thank you all, she said. Let's remember what this fund is for. Not spreadsheets, not PR. People. She left it at that. James followed close behind her. He didn't say anything until they stepped out into the lobby again. What they found there stunned even him. The entire room had quieted. Customers stood straighter. Conversation stopped. Eyes turned. Martha Coleman, dismissed an hour earlier as just another problem customer, now walked through the lobby with the dignity of someone who had weathered storms worse than this. And the people watched. James placed a hand on her back, gently guiding her forward. Near the entrance, a mother leaned down to her young son and whispered, "That's the woman from the poster, baby. The one who feeds people." The boy looked up at Martha with wide eyes, then gave her a shy wave. She smiled at him, soft but real. Emily stood frozen behind her glass station. James and Martha paused by the counter. Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her face trembled with something that wasn't fear this time. It was shame. Martha didn't scold her. She didn't demand an apology. She just said quietly, "Next time, look with your heart before you look with your suspicion." Emily nodded once, eyes glistening. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. Then James and Martha stepped outside into the sunlight. Outside the bank, the sun cast long shadows across the pavement as James and Martha walked side by side. For a moment, neither said anything. They didn't need to. The silence between them was filled with mutual understanding, respect, and decades of shared struggle. At the curb, James unlocked the passenger door of his navy sedan and gestured for Martha to sit. She did so slowly, easing into the leather seat, still clutching the now crumpled disbursement receipt in her hand. James slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, but he didn't pull away. "You sure you're okay?" he asked. Martha looked at him, then out the window at the glass facade of Bank South. "I've been worse," she said. "But not by much." James sighed and rubbed his thumb across his brow. "You should have told me you were coming. I would have had someone meet you at the door. A reporter, even. Made it public." "That's exactly why I didn't tell you," she replied. "I wasn't testing the system. I was testing the people in it." He turned to her fully now. "And what did you find?" Martha gave a dry, tired smile. "That too many still look at old black women and see a problem instead of a person." James didn't argue. He couldn't. "They looked at my shoes," she continued. "My sweater. Not my name. Not my legacy. Just the parts they thought made me small." James rested his hand gently on the steering wheel, knuckles white. "Well, that changes today. They won't remember my name, James. Not all of them. But they'll remember what it felt like when the truth hit the room." He nodded slowly. "Still. They'll feel it at corporate. I'll make sure of that." They drove in silence for a few minutes before James pulled into the side parking lot of a small brick building with stained glass windows and a sign out front, Lightbridge Community Kitchen, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Inside, volunteers were bustling, unloading crates of canned food, chopping vegetables, stirring large pots of stew. The smell of cornbread baking filled the hallway. When Martha entered, the room changed. "Miss Martha," someone called. "You made it." A group of volunteers, young and old, black and white, students and retirees, rushed to greet her. There were hugs, hands held a beat too long, smiles that reached the eyes. James stood off to the side, watching. This was the real bank. The real investment. In every pot stirred and every tray served, Martha had left her legacy. She sat down at a small folding table where donations were counted, and began to sort through envelopes and receipts, the disbursement paper now neatly tucked away in her purse. An hour passed. Then 2. And just as the noon crowd began forming outside the community center, the door opened, and in walked Emily Harper. Martha didn't see her at first. She was focused on the clipboard in front of her. But others noticed. Emily wore jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. No makeup. No heels. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun. She held a brown paper bag and a plastic-wrapped apron. A few heads turned. One man near the soup pot narrowed his eyes, recognizing her from earlier that morning. But Emily didn't falter. She walked straight toward Martha, stopped a few feet away, and waited. Martha looked up slowly. She blinked once, then closed her folder. Emily took a shaky breath. "I was wrong," she said. "About everything. And I'm sorry." Silence. Martha studied her. The room grew quiet again. "Why are you here?" Martha asked, not unkindly, but not softly either. Emily swallowed hard. "Because I didn't come from much. And I should have known better. But I let the system tell me who matters and who doesn't. I don't want to be that person anymore." She held up the paper bag. "I brought lunch. And, if you'll let me, I'd like to volunteer today. Maybe learn something that doesn't come from a screen." Martha nodded once. Not approval. But permission. "Go wash your hands," she said. "They need help plating cornbread." Emily looked relieved and turned toward the kitchen. As she disappeared behind the door, James approached Martha. "Well," he said, "that's one way to change policy." Martha smiled faintly. "I'm not trying to change policy. I'm trying to change hearts. And maybe," he added, "save a few souls along the way." At the back of the room, someone flipped on a speaker. Soft gospel music began to play, Aretha Franklin, low and full of spirit. The lunch crowd began to file in. Emily returned minutes later in an apron, fumbling slightly as she joined the kitchen staff. Someone handed her a ladle. Another offered a hairnet. She got to work. No announcements. No grand gestures. But the change had begun. The steam from the soup pots rose in curling tendrils as Emily Harper ladled stew into white plastic bowls, her motions clumsy at first. She stood beside a gray-haired woman named Loretta, who moved with practiced grace, plating collard greens and cornbread like she'd been doing it since the church kitchen was built. "You ever used a ladle before, sweetheart?" Loretta asked, half joking. Emily let out a breathy laugh. "Not like this. Closest I've come is pouring lattes." Loretta gave a knowing smile. "Well, we don't use almond milk here, but we do serve seconds." They both chuckled, tentatively at first, then more warmly. Across the kitchen, Martha Coleman watched from the folding table as volunteers bustled between tasks. Her eyes occasionally drifted to Emily. She wasn't expecting miracles. Just movement. By the time the lunch rush peaked, Emily was sweating. She had flour on her sleeve, a dab of grease on her cheek, and a hairnet that wouldn't stay put. But she didn't leave. She didn't take a break. And when a man in tattered clothes and sun-worn skin approached the line, Emily didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She handed him a bowl, smiled, and said, "Take 2 if you need to." He did. And he thanked her like it meant everything. Back at the bank, the fallout from the morning's incident was already rippling through the ranks. Regional Director Monica Chen had received James Prescott's report, complete with eyewitness statements, lobby footage, and a formal request for an internal review. By 3 p.m., an emergency meeting had been scheduled with senior leadership. Harris was summoned. He arrived at headquarters looking pale, clutching a copy of the Lightbridge disbursement form as if it might save him. Monica didn't sugarcoat it. "Do you realize what this looks like?" she asked sharply, slamming a copy of the report onto the table. "A 72-year-old black woman, one of our region's most respected philanthropists, gets dismissed and threatened with removal, and your staff's first instinct is to escalate rather than investigate?" Harris tried to explain. He referenced the glitchy system. The fraud incident from last week. Protocols. But Monica wasn't interested in excuses. "You didn't see a customer. You saw a liability. And now you are the liability." She paused, let the silence settle. "You're relieved from front-end operations. Effective immediately." Harris didn't speak. He nodded stiffly and stood to leave. "Brian," Monica said, her voice softer now, "this wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a test of character. And you failed." Back at the Lightbridge kitchen, Emily wiped down tables as the last few guests trickled out. She moved slower now, not from exhaustion, but reflection. The kind that doesn't come with words, just the heavy silence of realization. She saw the woman who came in alone with a toddler, trying to feed him while rationing her own plate. She saw the elderly man who pocketed a slice of cornbread for later, eyes darting as if someone might take it back. She saw a man in a veteran's cap crying into his bowl. These weren't service recipients. They were people. People she had once overlooked the way she'd overlooked Martha. She returned to the kitchen, apron stained and heart full. "I'd like to come back," she said quietly to Loretta. "Next week. Or, whenever you need someone." Loretta looked at her for a moment, then said, "We always need someone." Martha stood quietly nearby, arms crossed. She didn't interrupt. But as Emily turned to leave for the day, she stopped in front of her, unsure of what to say. "I was wrong," Emily said again, voice breaking. "Not just about you. About how I see people." Martha nodded. "Then do better. Not just here. Everywhere." "I will," Emily promised. That night, Emily sat at her desk in her tiny apartment, typing a message she wasn't sure she'd send. To James Prescott. Subject: Thank you. I saw her. Not when she walked into the bank. Not when she handed me that paper. But today. In a soup kitchen where she didn't raise her voice once, but moved with purpose like she owned the ground we all walked on. Because she does. I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed to say thank you. And I'll keep showing up, quietly, consistently, until my actions mean more than my apology ever could. She hit send. Then she sat back and stared at the sticky note on her monitor she had written that afternoon, in a moment of quiet clarity. People before process. 12 days later, the lobby of Bank South in Florence felt like a different place. Not because the tile had been replaced or the lighting changed, it hadn't. But the energy had shifted. And people noticed. Behind the counter, Emily Harper now wore less makeup and a new name tag. The tag was the same shape and color, but the title beneath her name had changed. Community Liaison, Grant and Foundation Services. James Prescott had called it a second chance. Martha Coleman had simply called it an opportunity. And Emily had taken it. Since that day at the soup kitchen, she'd volunteered every weekend, quietly, with no fanfare. She'd answered phones, unloaded deliveries, and helped install 2 new shelves in the pantry herself. She'd taken the equity training seriously too. Not just clicking through modules, but showing up to the in-person workshops. Listening. Asking questions. And every Tuesday, she hand-delivered processed Lightbridge paperwork herself. One morning, As she was helping an elderly customer organize a stack of utility bills, the front doors of the bank opened, and in walked Monica Chen. The regional director had come unannounced, flanked by a silent assistant and a man with a clipboard. Her heels echoed sharply on the marble, and the room snapped to attention. She wasn't angry. She wasn't smiling either. She simply observed. Watched as Emily patiently explained a low-interest loan option to a family whose son had just aged out of foster care. Watched the security guard gently hold the door open for a disabled veteran. Watched a teller, newly hired, offer someone a bottle of water as they waited for a form to be printed. After 20 minutes, Monica turned to Emily. "I've read the reports. But I wanted to see it with my own eyes." Emily stood up straight. "And what did you see, ma'am?" "I saw someone trying to earn back trust," Monica said. "Not just with customers, but with herself." Emily didn't know how to respond to that. Monica continued. "We've approved your request. You'll now lead our internal training series on community engagement. Effective immediately. We're calling it the Coleman Initiative." Emily's breath caught. "Named after?" "Yes," Monica nodded. "Named after the woman you once underestimated. And who changed the trajectory of this entire bank." Meanwhile, across town, Martha Coleman sat in the modest living room of her bungalow. Her knees were propped on a pillow. A cup of tea steamed gently beside her. On her lap rested a small box tied with ribbon. Inside, a letter. "Dear Ms. Coleman. On behalf of the Bank South Regional Leadership Team, we extend our deepest apologies for the treatment you received on the morning of your visit. As a result of your courage, and your insistence on grace over vengeance, we are proud to announce the establishment of the Coleman Initiative, a training and grant accessibility program designed to ensure no one in our branches is ever treated as you were again. Your dignity sparked a necessary fire. And we thank you. Respectfully. Monica Chen. Regional Director." Martha read it twice. Then set it down. She didn't need the apology. But she appreciated the accountability. That evening, James came by with cornbread and chili. They ate in silence, as old friends often do, content in the understanding that real change never comes all at once, but when it comes, it's undeniable. "You hear about Emily?" he asked. Martha gave a knowing look. "She's trying." "She's more than trying," James said. "She's leading." Martha nodded slowly. "Good. Then maybe next time an old woman walks through those doors, they'll see her for who she is, not for what they assume." James raised his glass. To assumptions being broken. They clinked gently. The next morning, the first Coleman Initiative training began at a branch 2 towns over. Emily stood at the front of a modest conference room. No PowerPoint. Just her voice, a whiteboard, and a stack of handwritten notes. She began with a simple question: "What do you see when someone walks through the door?" One teller said, "Their clothes." Another said, "Their account number." A third said, "Their attitude." Emily nodded. Then added, "Now ask what you're missing." And with that, the room grew quiet. But this time, not with discomfort. With thought. Martha's story became the anchor of that training. And quietly, in places she'd never visit, her name became a lesson, not in pain, but in possibility. Spring turned the dogwood trees of Florence soft pink and white. The city sidewalks, once faded by a cold winter, now pulsed gently with color, with life. And every third Friday of the month, the lobby of Bank South transformed, again, not just physically, but spiritually. That Friday morning, the staff rolled out a folding table just beside the main teller window. On it sat pamphlets printed in English and Spanish, a sign-up clipboard for grant assistance, and a hand-lettered sign that read, "Need help? We're here to listen." The Coleman Initiative. Behind the table stood 2 volunteers, a young black woman studying social work and a retired Army veteran. They weren't bank employees. They were community liaisons, trained and trusted to help. Emily had hand-picked them. She watched from her new desk nearby, no longer behind bulletproof glass, but at a low-sitting counter with an open smile. That day, a woman named Jeanette, nearly 70, walked into the branch holding a faded brown envelope. She wore orthopedic sandals and a shawl against the breeze. She clutched the envelope like a fragile relic and approached the desk with uncertainty. Emily looked up and smiled warmly. "Good morning," she said. "Can I help you with something?" Jeanette hesitated, then offered the envelope. "My church said something about a grant. My grandson's heater's been broke all winter." Emily took the envelope gently, glanced at the Lightbridge stamp, and smiled. "Yes, you're in the right place. We can help." Jeanette's shoulders slumped in quiet relief. "I wasn't sure anyone would take me seriously. I don't look like someone who belongs in a place like this." Emily's reply was soft, but steady. "We're changing what that means." In the back office, a framed photo hung on the wall now, something most customers never saw. It wasn't a corporate founder or a famous CEO. It was Martha Coleman, smiling with a ladle in her hand and a child tugging at her apron. Below it was a simple plaque. "She didn't ask to be honored. She asked us to do better." Brian Harris no longer worked at the Florence branch. After the incident and the internal hearing, he'd been quietly reassigned to a compliance desk in regional headquarters. His new role was clerical, no customer interaction, no policy decisions. The memo cited retraining pending. It was, in every way, a demotion. But Martha Coleman didn't follow his fate. She didn't need to. Her focus remained where it always had, on the people. At Lightbridge, funding applications doubled in volume after the new community bank partnerships launched. And for the first time in the foundation's history, the board approved a pilot project, mobile banking advocacy units, designed to meet underserved families directly in their neighborhoods. The trucks rolled out in May, painted in bright blue and orange, with a quote from Martha stenciled across the side. "Your worth isn't determined by how you look when you walk in, but by who you are when you stand tall." The story traveled, online, in churches, in classrooms. In a local high school's business ethics course, a student named Jordan stood and gave a presentation titled, "The Day a Bank Got Schooled by a 72-Year-Old Legend." In the crowd, his teacher wiped a tear. She'd been there that day, quietly watching in the lobby, too ashamed to speak. But she never forgot. Back in Martha's modest home, the walls remained mostly bare, except for one item. A single sticky note, the one Emily had mailed her after being reinstated. It had only 3 words. "People before process." Martha framed it. And every Sunday morning, she sat near the window with a cup of tea, her scarf neatly wrapped, her shoes still chosen for comfort. She no longer walked into banks much. She didn't need to. Her legacy no longer lived on slips of paper. It echoed in changed hearts, opened doors, and every volunteer who reached across a counter not just to serve, but to see. And maybe that was always the point. Sometimes, the smallest assumptions reveal the largest truths. Martha Coleman never raised her voice, never demanded the spotlight, and yet her quiet insistence on dignity forced a bank to change, and reminded a community what real legacy looks like. As Martha once said, "The moment we decide who someone is based on how they look, is the moment we forget who we are." If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Share it. Start a conversation. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and what you saw in Martha's journey. And for more stories that echo truth, dignity, and justice, subscribe to True Echo. Turn on the bell so you never miss a moment that matters.